Welcome to the Health and Healing Podcast with me, Sophia, where I talk all things to do with health and healing, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. I share insights from personal stories, client wins, chats with other practitioners, and offer nourishing support for those navigating the healing path. Now, if you are wanting to feel healthier, more at home in your body, and in love with your life, then you are in the right place, my love. Enjoy the episode. Welcome, everyone, to the first episode of the Health and Healing Podcast. It is a pleasure to be here today and to be able to share some insights and support into that health and healing journey. It is not just about getting to the end and living this life where we don't have any challenges, we don't have any health challenges. It is about learning how to embrace the nuances, the layers, the unveilings. And so creating this space where I can sit down, talk a little bit more, expand on some ideas, get into the nuances, chat with other people is going to be really helpful. And unpacking some of these experiences that feel so multifaceted, they feel layered, and there's the emotional component, there's the spiritual component, the mental, the physical component. And it's not as easy as, an Instagram post with 5 top things to do if you have the condition of XYZ, right? There's layers to it. And so being able to sit here and discuss some of those things and also lend an ear as someone who has been through many, many challenges on the health and healing path, it is a real pleasure. So thank you for tuning in, first and foremost. And I really wanted to start today with getting into kind of some of the foundations around health. And that means talking about health conditions, talking about symptoms, talking about disease, and what it actually all means. So if you're not already settled, you might like to sit down with a cup of tea and a journal, make some notes along the way that inspires you. Otherwise, you're more than welcome to just continue along with your day and listen to this in the background if you wish. So when it comes to the idea around health conditions, symptoms, disease, there can be a lot of kind of controversy with these topics, a lot of opinions, a lot of debate, a lot of what you should and shouldn't do. And so before I fully dive into that, I thought I'd start with just sharing a bit about my background, if you don't already know, where I come from, where I speak from, and what my experience is with health and healing. And so I'll offer a brief overview just to cover the general gist. And so when I was growing up, when I was younger, little did I know I was living in a state of chronic stress. It was only later on in my life that I could recognize that the patterns and the feelings as continuous cycles of a stress response. And I didn't have those tools to regulate, to support myself, which I feel like many people growing up in my generation, the generation before, and the current generation, we're not really offered those tools of regulation and supporting ourselves. And so when I came to my teenage years, I ended up losing my menstrual cycle for about 3 years. And I didn't really recognize that as an issue. I just thought, great, I don't have to go through this monthly cycle. But it was when it came back in my late teen years that it started to create havoc in my life. I had an array of symptoms from chronic pain, chronic fatigue. I was deeply depressed. I gained about 20 kgs. I was really suffering with my own kind of body image and relating to my body. And it continued to grow for a good couple of years. I had challenges with eating. I would binge eat, and I just could not stop eating, even though I knew different. It was just, there was this real hormonal drive. And so throughout all of that, the symptoms evolved and they changed, and I had all kinds of different symptoms, from panic attacks. I, at some stage, developed tics, so I would move my shoulder, turn my head uncontrollably. I had thrush for about 6 months. So if you're a woman and you know the UTIs, the BV, the thrush, anything along there, it's so common for women. And yeah, these symptoms would just come and go, change, take a different form. And I was going to different practitioners, holistic. I was also going to doctors, and I was trying to get an understanding of what was going on in my body. I was so young, in my late teen years. I couldn't quite make sense of what was happening, and I didn't feel at that time supported, nurtured, or held. And I really deeply feared my own body. I was so afraid of what was going on, and that I couldn't understand it, and that I couldn't fix it. It seemed like no matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried, I just could not fix what seemed to be going wrong. And that is what really took me into the first steps of my path when it comes to health and healing. I began looking into different modalities to support myself, because I didn't feel like my needs were getting met outside of myself. So I took it upon myself to take responsibility and to learn. That led me down the path of yoga. I had already been practicing for about 5 years before I started my training, and I found it really supportive, and so I decided to take that next step and do some training. I also did health coaching, so integrative nutrition health coaching, and really started to learn about the importance of food as fuel and how it interacts with our full system, how it impacts our mental health, our emotional states, and even our energetic body, the spiritual qualities, how it can open and close a channel. And then I also started to dive more into that energetic work with Reiki over the years as well. And so for me, it was my training and my learning was really inspired by my own personal experience with challenges on that health path, and really questioning the purpose of life, the purpose of me being here. And so some of those deep, overwhelming experiences came to me at quite a young age, and in many ways it taught me to grow up quite quickly, but in some ways there was still some areas of my body that were left unintegrated, and that is where the journey, the learning, the healing has come to really integrate the different aspects of myself as a human, with the spirit world and with the full expression of the physical world. And so diving into today's topic, first I'm going to have a little bit of tea. Diving into today's topic, I thought we would, talk about symptoms, talk about disease, talk about health conditions, and how we can actually start to make sense of it as we're navigating that journey. And so, firstly, I thought we could define a symptom. If we can break down the word, if we can break down the meaning, then maybe we can get a little bit of a better understanding as to how we can relate to it, how we can relate to our bodies, how we can relate to our conditions and our experiences with health. And so, starting with symptoms, I Googled the definition, so I'm just going to read the definition to you. And I also had a look at the etymology, which is like the history of a word. So the definition of symptom is a physical or mental feature which is regarded as indicating a condition of disease, particularly such a feature that is apparent to the patient. So that is one definition. And another one that came up was an indication of the existence of something, especially of an undesirable situation. So those are the two definitions. And now you can see that there is the mention of physical and mental. There's also the mention of disease, and there is the mention of it being undesirable. Now, if we look into the etymology, it's kind of where that definition stems from is it comes to a departure from normal function or form as an expression or evidence of a disease. So again, we hear disease. But we also hear departure from normal function. So it is something that is happening in our experience that isn't considered normal. And so with that, I think it's really important to explore and understand, well, what is normal for us? And while you could get scientific, you could talk about cellular function and how a human body is supposed to work. We're not always monitored 24/7, right? We're not constantly checking our statistics. And while there are some tools that can allow us to check some things at times, so you've got the rings and the watches and blood glucose monitors and things like that, we can't really fully comprehend or understand the full spectrum of everything that is happening in our body at any given time. And so learning to formulate a relationship to our normal is layered, it's complex, it's based in experience for ourselves, and having the tools to deepen that experience and to understand the experience. And so once you know what that normal is, that baseline, which by the way can also change, then you can have a clear idea of when something deviates from that normal. So a lot of times as we get older, it is almost expected in society that the body starts to fail more, we have more aches and more pains, more discomforts, and then that is normal. And so then we wouldn't consider certain symptoms as wrong. Well, we wouldn't consider certain symptoms as something that can be resolved, but it's just normal. It just happens. It's just the way it is. And there's a powerlessness to that in a sense. There's a quality of acceptance where you can make peace with the ever-changing, growing, aging body, because that is natural, that is part of nature. But then there are certain aspects of as well where it could be a giving up. It's too hard for me to do anything about it now. And so it's finding that balance for yourself of acceptance, making peace with the changing nature of the body, and also knowing when to take action and seek within and externally a resolution for yourself. And so I think when it comes to this idea of normality, the expression of the body, it can be different for different people. And that's where that self-inquiry comes in, and getting to know your body, getting to know your normal, what feels right and what feels off. And sometimes you'll hear stories, and this is what it was like for me, of when something shifted in my body. When I was young, I knew something was off, something wasn't right. I felt like I had lost my body, I had lost my function, and I just knew deep down that this was not my healthiest, most vibrant self. I was not expressing myself fully in the world. I was not happy. I was not content. I was not fulfilled. And so I knew something was off. And that is when I started to seek resources and support to guide me along that journey. Now, if you have that deep inner knowing as well that something is off, you may come across people or practitioners who don't get it, who shrug it off, who say everything's fine, who look at your blood work and see there's no issues, or supposedly no issues, and you might have family members or friends who don't resonate, who don't quite understand what it is you mean. And that is part of that journey too. That is very common for people who are faced with quite a sudden shift in their health, particularly when it comes to chronic health challenges. It can feel very isolating because deep down, something feels off. You try to express it, but it isn't met. It isn't received in your current environment. And that is an invitation to dive deeper and to expand your environment. And so then with symptoms, coming back to that idea of symptoms and the changing nature of the body, the way I like to look at it is the body changes and different symptoms can be an expression of change. And again, knowing when something feels off, but also how can you hold yourself in safety and calm throughout that journey as you shift your environment and you start that journey or you take the next step on your journey. And so then a symptom doesn't have to be a bad thing. Oftentimes we are faced with something new, something challenging in the body. When we come back to that definition of symptom, an undesirable situation, when we're faced with that undesirable sensation in the body, that undesirable change, oftentimes people jump to this conclusion that it's a bad thing. There's something wrong with me. I need this to be fixed. Someone help me. Someone fix this problem for me. And I always like to reflect now on, I'm experiencing a change. This may be an undesirable situation. This may be uncomfortable. But maybe it's not a bad thing. Maybe it's just change. And we know with the way of life and nature, we are always faced with challenges. We are always faced with challenges, and it is a part of life. And so if in those moments when we are faced with a challenge, in this case, a health challenge, if we can know and trust that it is part of that next step forward, if we can choose to learn from it, to grow from it, to get to know our bodies better, then that is also part of what is going to support you in your liberation from the suffering piece, the piece where you feel so much resistance, so much heaviness, like you're just not getting anywhere, where you can feel really stuck in your body. Part of the way to liberate yourself from that is to trust in your body, trusting in the ever-changing nature of your body. And from there, talking about symptoms, it is often in relation to disease. And this is going to build upon this topic, right? Disease is mentioned in relation to symptoms quite a bit in the definition. And so if we define disease, I'll just read the definition from Google again. A disorder of structure or function in a human, animal, or plant, especially one that has a distinctive group of symptoms, signs, or anatomical changes, and often a known cause. So symptoms are mentioned here. Change in structure and function, anatomical change, and often a known cause. So that comes from the history of science, that comes from the history of more holistic and alternative medicines, where we sometimes can put the puzzle pieces together. There can be a root cause for the expression of the symptom or disease. And so then the etymology of disease can be tied to discomfort, inconvenience, distress, trouble, or to make uneasy, inflict pain. And it is also broken down into its two components, dis and ease. And so when we're looking at that in etymology, we can see here that reinforcement of it is an expression of discomfort, of inconvenience, of distress, of a lack of ease. There is something occurring in the body that isn't really comfortable. So sit with that for a moment. I'm experiencing something that I would like to change because it doesn't feel comfortable to be with it. But what if we could take a couple steps back instead of jumping straight away to there's something wrong with me, I need to get this fixed, I need to do X, Y, and Z. What if I can just sit and be with the dis-ease, welcome in the discomfort. If there's resistance to feeling that discomfort, starting to open the heart, open the body, to really allow in that experience, to allow in that feeling and that sensation, and recognize that it might not be a bad thing. It could just be an experience that is different from neutrality, or from happiness, or from joy. But in order to be a human, we need to experience the full spectrum of emotions, from grief all the way to joy, and everything in between. And that's the same with sensations. We can experience deep pleasure, but we can also experience deep pain. And if we are able to then sit with the dis-ease, the discomfort, start to take responsibility, start to connect to our body, to feel our body, to relate to our body, to listen to our body, to see what it has to say to us. What messages does it want to send through? Then we can get clarity in terms of what action steps to take next, instead of taking an action step reactively from fear, which is often what happens. And when you take a fearful action, you're never getting to the underlying reason for the expression of that disease in the first place, and it will manifest in another form at some stage. And so it's important to know with this, with symptoms and disease and health conditions, that what I'm talking about is a really reflective, kind of slow-moving process, right? Now, it's important to acknowledge that there is a time when you need to take action. Like, sometimes things need to happen quickly. And so that is for you to use your discernment of when, okay, I need to do something about this now, or there is space for me to be with my body in stillness. There is time. And that is for personal discernment. That is, each person needs to take self-responsibility in knowing that. And there are certain general symptoms and signals to, if you're kind of unsure of knowing when to do that, because sometimes it can feel like we need to make a quick decision, but we actually do have capacity to be with it and to feel into it. But sometimes the body, when we're so used to that reactive space and state, it will seem like we need to take this rushed action. So to give a general overview of times when it is okay to step back and reflect and connect to the body, I would say when, even if your body feels like heightened emotionally and reactive, if you are coming from this place, if the symptom and signal isn't actually life-threatening, and yet you're still having a really strong reactive response to it, chances are you can be with that discomfort for a while. But if there's clear life-threatening, emergency-like aspects to what is happening in terms of a symptom, then immediate attention is required, right? And so it is important to know that This isn't to dismiss when we need to take action and we need to take those steps forward. Definitely do so when it is needed. And the thing so once you kind of get that sense, and you can start to practice it then as well, when you have these signals, symptoms, and maybe on that chronic level where you keep having like a niggly backache that keeps coming back. And sometimes it's so bad you can hardly move, you stress, you panic, you need to take a painkiller because you have to keep doing more work, you can't stop. Sometimes in those moments, trying something different can be really helpful. And personally, I'm one to not take medication as much as possible. And it's not something I have taken since I was a young child. I don't think I've been on antibiotics since I was a young child. And the only thing that I have taken over the last decade or so would have been some painkillers at times where it's felt needed. And so for me, that is my personal approach. And I'm not suggesting that is what you do for yourself. That is for you to discern for yourself. But I have found that there is a time and a place for medication when it comes to symptoms. And sometimes it can be really helpful. But to then become reliant on it, again, is suppressing the signal, suppressing the discomfort, but it is not resolving the discomfort. And so that's where I like to call on the holistic health tools, the lifestyle factors, and the inner work of how can I really liberate myself from this deep resistance and this deep discomfort without pushing it away, without making it wrong or bad. And I think that is a really liberating shift to make when you recognize that all the different signals and symptoms are messengers. They are so important, so vital for your healing journey, and they will guide you forward. And the more we numb those out with medications, with alcohol, with drugs, with food, with any kind of coping mechanism or drugs, or addictions or televisions, things like that, doom scrolling, which is so common nowadays, the more we avoid it, the more it will persist. And so recognizing, honoring that the challenge that you are faced with is also the key to your liberation if you let it bring you closer into your own self, into your own being. And so something else I wanted to talk about here is when you receive a diagnosis. You've got a health condition, you've kind of been feeling like something is off, you're not getting many answers, you're not getting much clarity, and then finally, after months or years, you get a diagnosis, and it can feel so liberating, like it all makes sense now. X, Y, Z, it falls into place. I can finally understand why I am the way I am or why this is happening in my body. And it gives me some clarity on what I can do next. And I think it can be so, so helpful when we get that clarity. But there is also the possibility that that diagnosis, that label can also start to confine our experience. And if we don't fit into those exact characteristics that falls under the diagnosis or the health condition, then we're still left wondering, well, there's something a little bit different about me. What I seem to be the outlier, or I tried the things that are listed on curing the diagnosis or helping the diagnosis, and it hasn't really worked. And so I'm left a bit confused again, and I'm not quite sure where to go and what to do. And so it's important to know that when you do get a diagnosis, it can be really supportive. It can give you some insights, but it is not going to necessarily be the cure. It is a piece to a puzzle, and it can give you a little bit of guidance for your next steps forward. And so it can also shift the way in which practitioners or others will relate to you or treat you or support you. And so I have found for myself that whenever I've had a diagnosis, ultimately choosing not to identify with it, choosing not to make it mean anything about me, or choosing to not letting it define me as who I am as a person. I am not Sophia with this condition. I am just Sophia. I am just an expression of the universe, right? I don't need to be defined by a condition. I don't need to introduce myself alongside my condition. And I have found that to be one, it breaks me out of that mindset of there's something wrong with me. Because oftentimes when we receive a diagnosis, we think that we are outside the norm. We think we are different. We think there is something wrong with us. And even if we're not consciously thinking that, it can come subconsciously. And there can be like layers to that, hierarchies to that of superiority or inferiority. And just acknowledging the label without attaching yourself to the label, I find is really, really helpful in getting you some resources and insights into what you can do for yourself, but without making it or limiting you or feeling like it is a burden or feeling like you now have to be a certain way because of it. And what I've noticed with all of these things, when it comes to health conditions, when it comes to diagnoses, when it comes to symptoms, most of the time, the people who are experiencing chronic symptoms and actively go out and search, try to find an answer, they feel something is off, they're going because they want results, they want change, they want to go back to how things were, as opposed to the people who like experience different symptoms and they kind of just shrug it off, they get on with their lives, it's not such a big deal, not really worried about it, I have more to life than just my body and my experience, and I'm not going to let it, stop me from living. Where there are people where it really does, it has such a big impact, and they do whatever it takes to find answers. And oftentimes those are the people who are really high achievers, perfectionistic. It can often be women as well. And obviously it can also be men. But I'm going to speak to the high achieving woman here, the perfectionistic woman here, who will have some kind of diagnosis, whether it be something like endometriosis, which is becoming more and more common among women, autoimmunity, which again, the statistics are higher in women. And it feels like there's something wrong in her body. And all of a sudden, she no longer feels safe in her body, or it can seem that way. Like she feels like there's something off. She feels foreign in this space. And she becomes more on guard and hypervigilant and worried that something's going to flare up a symptom. And when the symptom flare up comes, it's really, it's really debilitating. And so there's all of a sudden this fear around the body and not trusting the body and feeling like one wrong move is going to create this detrimental cascading effect. And so she is so determined to find an answer. She is so determined to figure out what is happening. She consults Dr. Google, social media, TikTok, Instagram, and follows all these different health practitioners to get some answers. She tries different alternative practices and practitioners. And I can speak to this because this was me for many years. And in many, many ways, it was really helpful. But in many, many ways, it also perpetuated the stress loop, perpetuated the symptoms, because I was so unwilling to claim, own, experience, surrender to the discomfort and the sensation. I had to mask that with seeking answers, trying to fix problems, the problem, my body being the problem. I could not just be with it and rest with it and love it and be okay with it. and then take action from that loving place. It had to be, there's something wrong with me. I'm panicking. I'm afraid. I'm scared of my own body. I don't feel safe in my own body. I need to quickly get rid of this feeling. And that is where I would seek the answers from. And then the body is feeling rushed and the stress levels are high. The hormones become even more imbalanced. And it becomes this never ending journey of trying to heal and just coping to get through another day. And so I wanted to speak to that woman for a little bit here, because I know that feeling, and I know that when you're in the middle of it and someone then says to you, hey, just take a minute, take a breath, step back, learn to love your body as it is, and all this kind of, and all that, those kinds of practices and words that can feel like you don't want to hear a bar of it. You feel like you've tried everything, and then someone else is just adding one more thing to try to do, and it's like you're at capacity. You don't want to hear what anyone else has to say anymore. And I get that. There's that quality of defensiveness and not being open anymore, because you feel so untrusting within yourself that you don't even know what information to trust and what information not to trust. And this is where I want to start to speak about something that I am going to offer for free. I'm going to do an online workshop, a free online workshop for women who are experiencing that, and to how to navigate that situation when you've got the disease, the diagnosis, the health conditions, the symptoms, and you're in that stress pattern, that stress loop of constantly looking for answers, constantly trying to heal, just coping, just getting through another day. You've seen so many practitioners, you're continuing to see different practitioners, you're taking the supplements, you've tried to eat healthy, doing all those things. And this workshop really is about bringing it back into reconnecting to awakening your calm. So that's what it's called, Awaken Your Calm. And it is about finding that beautiful inner sense of safety within your life, within your body, so that you can feel more guided, more led in your decision making, so that you know when to take immediate action, and you know when you can rest with the discomfort, and you actually can build the capacity to hold the discomfort. And so this workshop is going to go into the different stress archetypes that play out in women, and how it doesn't always look a certain way. There are different layers and there are different stages to the chronic stress pattern. And it's going to give you kind of the step-by-step path of how you can uncover that pattern and start to resolve the pattern and heal your relationship to your health and your body. And I think it's such a beautiful, beautiful thing to learn, whether you're navigating health or any challenge in your life, of the immense power we have as individuals, we have as women, and the capacity we have to experience the depth of humanness. And when we come to that place, and when we can start to then relate to our, in this case, health conditions, disease, symptoms in a new way, we get to then be students to the experience. And that in itself is healing, and you will notice the symptoms change because you are listening. And you may have heard it many times where people say, listen to your body. But what does that actually mean? How do I actually listen to my body, right? And this is where in this workshop we touch on how you can start to learn that skill, how you can cultivate a toolbox to listen deeper and to understand what that means, and to become the woman who feels empowered in her health, who feels empowered in her life, and feels deeply, deeply safe and settled. And so that is all I wanted to talk about today. I hope that's quite interesting in terms of, breaking down some of these words, the symptoms, the disease, and getting to understand it a little bit better. And from that standpoint, deepening your relationship to your body and to the expression of your body, and feeling more trusting on the path, and that there is reason behind it, there is purpose to it. And if it doesn't feel like that, you can find the reason within by relating to the experience in a different way. So if there is any questions or anything about what I covered today, you're more than welcome to find me. I will pop all the links and information in the show notes or in the description. There'll be the link to sign up to Awaken Your Calm as well. I highly, highly recommend this for the woman who is navigating her health and feeling challenged with her health and her nervous system, and wanting to learn how to step into a safer, calmer, more alive body. I will also link my website, my Instagram down there, so you can connect with me on those spaces. And yeah, I'm so glad to have begun this journey into sharing more nuanced conversations about health and healing. And I look forward to what is yet to come. Have a beautiful week, have a beautiful day, and you'll hear from me next time.